It was a bitter, cold evening in New York City, the kind that turned breath into visible clouds and numbed fingers within minutes. The sidewalks of Broadway glistened with fresh snow, trampled into slush by the steady stream of theater-goers in their elegant winter attire. Outside the prestigious Barrymore Theatre, a crowd had gathered despite the freezing temperatures, held captive by the allure of celebrity sightings at the premiere of a highly anticipated film. Among the onlookers stood Jamie, a thin 13-year-old with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed too old for such a young face. A tattered navy blue coat hung from narrow shoulders, its zipper broken and replaced with safety pins meticulously fastened to keep out the biting cold. Worn sneakers, soaked through from the snow, completed the picture of quiet desperation that nobody in the excited crowd seemed to notice. Jamie's hands trembled, partly from cold but mostly from nervousness. The $100 bill, folded and refolded in the pocket of those worn jeans, represented a level of boldness that made Jamie's heart race. The plan, formulated through sleepless nights in the back seat of their family's old station wagon, now seemed impossibly daunting. The family's descent into homelessness had been swift and merciless. 3 months ago, they had a modest apartment, 2 working parents, and the security that comes with knowing where you'll sleep each night. Then came Dad's layoff, Mom's worsening illness, the mounting medical bills, and finally, the eviction. Notice that had changed everything. Now home was a car parked in different lots each night, and dinner was whatever could be purchased from the dollar menu to be divided between 3 people. A sudden surge of excitement rippled through the crowd. As black SUVs began arriving at the theater entrance, Jamie pushed forward slightly, heart hammering against ribs. Each vehicle disgorged its cargo of glittering celebrities, their smiles bright under the camera flashes, their outfits perfectly tailored against the winter chill. "That's Emily Blunt," someone whispered excitedly nearby. "And Stanley Tucci just behind her," another voice added. Jamie paid them little attention, scanning each arriving face with increasing urgency. Mom needed her medication. The prescription sat folded in Jamie's other pocket, a cruel reminder of what 108.62 could provide. Relief from pain, a full night's sleep, perhaps even strength enough to try for a job next week. They'd scraped together $8.62 from returning bottles and loose change. $100 would make the difference. A fresh wave of whispers announced another arrival, and Jamie's breath caught. There she was, Meryl Streep, elegant in a long charcoal coat, her silver hair styled perfectly, her smile gracious as she waved to fans. Unlike some who rushed past the crowd, Meryl moved unhurriedly, occasionally stopping to sign an autograph or exchange a word with an admirer. This was the moment. Jamie had chosen Meryl specifically, having read countless articles about her philanthropy and kindness. If anyone might listen, might help, it would be her. With a deep breath that felt like inhaling courage itself, Jamie pushed through the last row of onlookers and stepped into the cleared path where security created a corridor for the celebrities. Immediately, a burly security guard moved to intercept, but Jamie was quick, darting past him and directly into Meryl's path. "Miss Streep," Jamie called, voice cracking slightly from both cold and fear. "Please." Meryl paused, her security detail immediately tensing and moving closer. The crowd quieted, all eyes suddenly on this unexpected interruption to the carefully choreographed evening. "I'm sorry, but I need to ask you something," Jamie continued, words tumbling out quickly before courage could evaporate. "I need $100. It's for my mum's medicine. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." The security guard reached for Jamie's shoulder, but Meryl raised her hand slightly, stopping him. For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable as she studied the young face before her. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. "Please," Jamie repeated, softer now, shame coloring pale cheeks. "I'll pay you back someday, I promise." What happened next would be discussed in hushed, reverent tones across social media platforms for weeks to come. Instead of calling for security or simply handing over money to make the uncomfortable moment pass, Meryl Streep did something entirely unexpected. She removed her gloves slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Jamie's face. Then she stepped closer, reducing the distance between Hollywood royalty and desperate child to mere inches. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice gentle but clear enough to carry to the now silent crowd. "Jamie," came the whispered reply. "And you need this money for your mother's medication?" Jamie nodded, throat suddenly too tight for words. Meryl glanced briefly at her assistant, who stood nearby clutching a portfolio of papers, then back to Jamie. "Where is your mother now, Jamie?" The question wasn't dismissive, but filled with genuine concern. Behind Meryl, unnoticed by Jamie, Helen Mirren had emerged from another vehicle, her attention immediately caught by the unfolding scene. She moved closer, exchanging a glance with Meryl that communicated volumes without words. "She's in our car," Jamie finally managed, eyes downcast. "3 blocks away. She doesn't know I'm here. She'd be really mad if she knew I was asking for money." A collective murmur passed through the crowd as the implication of those words registered. Not just a child asking for money, but a homeless family living in their car in the depths of a New York winter. The security team shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to proceed with this deviation from protocol. Cameras flashed more intensely, capturing the moment when glamour and desperation collided on a snowy Manhattan sidewalk. Meryl's response would transform not just one night, but the entire trajectory of a family's future. As she opened her mouth to reply, no one present could have predicted the extraordinary chain of events her words would set in motion, or how a desperate request on a freezing evening would become the catalyst for a story of compassion that would warm hearts across the nation. The crowd held its collective breath as Meryl Streep stood face to face with Jamie, the desperate request for $100 hanging in the frosty air between them. Photographers jostled for position, sensing a moment worth capturing. Jamie's request had cut through the glamour of the evening like a knife, exposing a raw reality that existed just blocks away from the glittering premiere. $100 for medicine, Meryl repeated thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving Jamie's face. She didn't reach for her purse as everyone expected. Instead, she did something that left onlookers stunned. She gently placed her hand on Jamie's shoulder and said, "I think we need to talk about more than just money, don't you?" Jamie blinked in confusion, having prepared for either a kind rejection or at best the requested cash. This response fell into neither category. Helen Mirren, who had been watching the interaction with interest, stepped forward to join them. "Meryl, is everything all right?" she asked, her British accent crisp in the cold air. "Helen, this is Jamie," Meryl replied, making the introduction as naturally as if they were at a dinner party rather than on a snowy sidewalk surrounded by paparazzi. "Jamie's mother needs medication, and they're currently living in their car." Helen's expression softened immediately, her eyes reflecting the same concern now evident in Meryl's face. Without hesitation, she joined the small circle, creating a buffer between Jamie and the curious crowd. "Well then," Helen said with characteristic directness, "I believe our first order of business should be getting somewhere warm to sort this out properly." Jamie stood frozen, unable to process this turn of events. The plan had been simple: ask for money, hopefully receive it, rush to the pharmacy and get back to the car where Mum and Dad waited, unaware of their child's desperate gambit. Now 2 of Hollywood's most respected actresses were suggesting, "What exactly?" Meryl turned to her assistant. "Rebecca, please tell Martin we'll be missing the first half hour. This is more important." She then looked back at Jamie with gentle eyes. "When did you last eat, Jamie?" The question caught Jamie off guard. "Yesterday, I think. Mum and Dad make sure I get something, but—" Jamie's voice trailed off, not wanting to admit that the family had been stretching 1 meal a day between the 3 of them. "That settles it," Helen declared, exchanging a knowing glance with Meryl. "Food first, then we'll address the medication." Meryl's security detail, now understanding this wasn't a security threat but a humanitarian situation, quickly reorganized, creating a protective formation around the unlikely trio. Rebecca, Meryl's assistant, was already on her phone, making arrangements in hushed, urgent tones. "But I need to get back," Jamie protested weakly, though the thought of food made the teenager's empty stomach twist painfully. "My parents will worry. We'll call them," Meryl assured, guiding Jamie toward her waiting SUV. "We can explain everything." Jamie hesitated. "They don't have phones anymore. We had to cancel the service." A shadow of understanding passed between the two actresses. Helen gently added, "Then we'll go to them afterward, I promise, but first let's get you fed and hear your full story." Minutes later, Jamie found himself seated in the back of a luxury vehicle between Meryl Streep and Helen Mirren, a scenario so improbable it felt like a fever dream. The warmth of the heated leather seats was almost painful against skin that had grown accustomed to the cold. As the car pulled away from the theatre, Jamie noticed that neither actress had asked the driver to take them to the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. Instead, they were heading to a small, family-owned Italian place in a quieter neighborhood. Giorgio's has private rooms and makes the best minestrone in the city, Meryl explained, noticing Jamie's questioning look. And they're discreet. No cameras. The restaurant owner greeted them at a back entrance, his eyes widening at the sight of his famous guests, but professionally containing his surprise. Within minutes they were settled in a warm private dining room, and the rich aroma of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. As bread and soup appeared before them, Helen gently encouraged, "Tell us about your family, Jamie. The whole story." Between careful spoonfuls of the richest soup Jamie had ever tasted, the story emerged in fits and starts. Dad had been in construction until a company downsizing 3 months ago. Dozens of applications later, he still hadn't found steady work. Mom had lupus, a condition that had been manageable with insurance, but had flared badly with the stress of their financial collapse. The medication she needed kept getting more expensive, and without it, she could barely get out of the car some days. "We were fine before," Jamie explained, eyes downcast. "We had an apartment in Queens. Dad coached my soccer team. Mom worked part-time at a florist. It all fell apart so fast." Meryl listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never interrupting Jamie's flow. Helen, meanwhile, had stepped away briefly to make a phone call, returning with a determined expression that suggested wheels were already in motion. "The prescription," Meryl said gently. "May I see it?" Jamie hesitated before pulling the crumpled paper from a pocket. Meryl studied it carefully before handing it to Rebecca, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation. "Rebecca will have this filled immediately," Meryl explained. "But Jamie, we want to do more than just provide one prescription." Helen nodded in agreement. "A bandage is useful, but healing the wound is better." Jamie looked between them, confusion evident. "I don't understand, I just needed the $100. Meryl's smile was warm as she leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes what we think we need and what we actually need are different things. Your courage in approaching me tonight wasn't just about medicine, was it? It was about hope." Jamie swallowed hard, fighting sudden tears. The simple kindness of being seen, truly seen, after months of invisibility on the streets was overwhelming. "Here's what I propose," Meryl continued. "After dinner, we'll go to your family with the medication. Then we'd like to help you all. Get a proper place to stay tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out next steps." "Why would you do that?" Jamie asked, the question escaping before it could be filtered. Helen answered with characteristic frankness. "Because we can. Because we should. Because humanity is about more than just passing each other on the street." Meryl reached out and gently squeezed Jamie's hand. "What do you say? Will you allow us to help in a way that might actually make a difference?" Jamie looked down at the now empty bowl of soup, at the warm bread still untouched on the plate, and finally up at these two women who had just upended all expectations of how this desperate gamble would end. The answer was already forming along, with the first fragile tendrils of something Jamie's family had lost months ago. Hope. Giorgio's private dining room had transformed into an unexpected sanctuary. Jamie sat between two of Hollywood's most acclaimed actresses, picking up the last piece of garlic bread with hesitant fingers. The teenager's initial discomfort at the upscale surroundings had gradually melted away, replaced by a tentative trust that grew with each passing moment. "Please have another serving," Helen encouraged, gesturing to the pasta that had arrived after the soup. "You're still too thin, dear," Jamie complied, hunger overriding any lingering shyness. It had been weeks since the family had enjoyed a proper meal, subsisting instead on fast food dollar menus and food bank offerings that required no cooking. "I think it's time we heard the complete story," Meryl said gently, her eyes conveying a compassion that made it impossible for Jamie to maintain walls that had been carefully constructed over months of hardship. "How exactly did your family end up living in a car?" Jamie set down the fork, the weight of their situation suddenly heavy again despite the warm food and warmer company. It wasn't one big thing, it was a bunch of small things that snowballed. Between bites of pasta, Jamie's full story emerged in greater detail than the abbreviated version shared earlier. Dad had worked for the same construction company for 11 years, rising to foreman. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. In their modest two-bedroom apartment. Mum's lupus diagnosis had come 3 years ago, but with Dad's insurance, they managed the condition with medication and regular doctor visits. Then the company lost this big contract, Jamie explained, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Dad came home early that day. I thought he was sick, but he just sat at the kitchen table for hours. 20 people got laid off. He was one of them. Meryl nodded encouragingly, while Helen listened with unwavering attention. He started looking for work right away. But construction slowed down and nobody was hiring foremen when they had their own guys they were trying to keep employed. Jamie's voice grew quieter. The severance lasted 6 weeks. Unemployment helped for a while. Mum tried picking up more hours at the florist, but the flare-ups got worse with the stress. Rebecca, who had returned with news that the prescription would be ready shortly, sat quietly taking notes as Jamie continued. Dad took whatever odd jobs he could find, handyman stuff mostly, but it wasn't enough for rent and food and Mom's medicine. Jamie's voice caught. The choice became medicine or rent. We chose medicine. The eviction notice came 2 days before Christmas. Helen reached over to squeeze Jamie's hand, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "And that's when you moved into the car?" Jamie nodded. "It's not so bad. Dad keeps it really clean. We have sleeping bags, and we found places to shower a couple times a week. The library has free internet, so I've kept up with some schoolwork." The attempt at optimism fell flat against the stark reality of their situation. "And your mother's condition?" Meryl asked softly. "Getting worse," Jamie admitted, the worry evident in furrowed brows. "The stress makes the lupus flare up, and without regular medication—" The sentence trailed off, the implications clear to everyone at the table. "The $100, Helen prompted gently. "That was for her current prescription?" "It's a temporary one. The doctor at the free clinic said it would help with the pain and inflammation. It's not her regular medication, that costs way more, but it would make her comfortable enough to maybe look for work again." Meryl exchanged a meaningful glance with Helen before turning back to Jamie. "And your parents have no idea you came to ask me for money tonight?" Jamie shook his head, shame coloring his cheeks. "Dad would be so upset. They've taught me never to beg. But I couldn't just sit there another night watching Mom hurt." A new understanding dawned on both actresses' faces. This wasn't just a child seeking help. This was a young person shouldering adult worries, making desperate choices out of love. Helen's phone buzzed with a text message. After reading it, she smiled. "My friend Dr. Patel has agreed to see your mother tomorrow morning at her private practice. No charge." Jamie's fork clattered against the plate. "Really? But how?" "Let's just say I'm very persuasive," Helen replied with a wink. "And Sarah, Dr. Patel, owes me a favor after I helped her daughter prepare for a drama school audition." Meryl, meanwhile, had been typing something on her phone. "I've arranged for a suite at the Marquis. It's not far from where your car is parked, and they have excellent room service." Jamie's eyes widened. "A hotel, but we can't afford—" "You misunderstand," Meryl interrupted gently. "This isn't something you need to afford. This is something we want to do." Confusion clouded Jamie's expression. "But why? You don't even know." "Us?" The question hung in the air for a moment before Helen answered. "When I was 9 years old, my family went through a very difficult period. My father had lost his job and things were dire. A teacher noticed I hadn't been eating lunch and took action. She didn't just give me food, she helped my father find work. That woman changed our lives without seeking recognition or reward." Meryl nodded. "We're fortunate enough to be in positions where we can help. The real question is, why wouldn't we?" Jamie struggled to comprehend this level of generosity from strangers, even famous ones. "But the tabloids and stuff, won't they make a big deal about this?" Meryl smiled. Only if they find out. And trust me, we're quite good at keeping things private when we want to. Helen leaned forward. What matters now is getting that medicine to your mother and your family into a warm, safe place tonight. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out longer-term solutions. Rebecca returned with news that the prescription was filled and waiting in the car. The timing was perfect, as the meal had concluded, leaving Jamie with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, and a mind racing with possibilities that hadn't existed an hour ago. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Jamie suddenly asked, "What about your movie premiere? You're missing it because of me." Meryl's laugh was warm and genuine. "Oh, trust me, I've seen plenty of movie premieres. Some things are far more important," Helen added, with characteristic directness. "Besides, the film will still be there tomorrow. Your mother needs her medication tonight." As they stepped out into the cold New York evening, Jamie felt a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. The next step would be introducing these famous, generous women to two proud parents who had done everything possible to shield their child from the harshest realities of their situation. The thought of that meeting filled Jamie with equal parts, anticipation and dread. How would Mom and Dad react to discovering their child had asked a stranger for money, even if that stranger was Meryl Streep? And how would they respond to the help being offered when they had worked so hard to maintain their dignity despite everything they'd lost? The SUV waited at the curb, its engine running, ready to bridge the gap between two worlds that rarely intersected in meaningful ways. As Jamie climbed in, one thought kept repeating: nothing would ever be the same after tonight. The SUV glided through Manhattan streets, its tinted windows concealing the remarkable trio inside from curious onlookers. Jamie sat perched on the edge of the leather seat, anxiety building with each block they traveled closer to where the family's aging station wagon was parked for the night. "It's just around this corner," Jamie directed, voice barely above a whisper. "They usually park under the overpass because the police don't check there as often." Meryl and Helen exchanged glances that contained volumes of unspoken concern. The reality of how this family had been living, hiding from authorities simply to have a place to sleep, was a stark reminder of how quickly security could crumble in what was supposedly the richest country in the world. "Jamie," Meryl said, gently, "when we meet your parents, would you like me to explain or would you prefer to do it?" Jamie's fingers twisted nervously in the hem of a worn sweatshirt. Maybe you could start. Dad might be less angry if it comes from you." Helen nodded sympathetically. "We'll make sure they understand this was our idea, not just yours." The driver turned the final corner, and Jamie pointed to a faded blue station wagon parked in the shadows beneath the overpass. Several other vehicles were similarly positioned, a small hidden community of the vehicularly homeless that most New Yorkers drove past without noticing. "That's it," Jamie confirmed. "The one with the taped-up rear window." As the SUV pulled, alongside the station wagon, movement was visible inside. The silhouette of a man sitting up straight, suddenly alert to the luxury vehicle stopping so close. The driver dimmed the headlights respectfully as Meryl's security detail scanned the area before giving a subtle nod. "Ready?" Helen asked, giving Jamie's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Jamie nodded, though the teenager's expression suggested readiness was far from what they felt. The SUV door opened, and Jamie stepped out first, immediately hurrying to the station wagon's driver's side window and tapping lightly. The window rolled down halfway, revealing a man in his early 40s with several days of stubble and tired eyes. That widened dramatically when he saw who was standing behind his child. "Jamie, what's going on?" His voice held equal parts confusion and alarm. In the reclined passenger seat, a woman stirred, her face drawn with pain, even in sleep. "Dad, it's okay," Jamie said quickly. "This is Miss Streep and Dame Meryl. They're here to help us." Robert Parker stared in disbelief at the two acclaimed actresses now standing beside his car, their breath forming clouds in the cold night air. His protective instincts immediately flared. "Jamie, what have you done?" he asked, his voice strained, with embarrassment and concern. Before Jamie could answer, Meryl stepped forward, her demeanor warm but respectful. "Mr. Parker, I'm Meryl Streep. Your child approached me this evening asking for help to purchase medication for your wife. I hope you'll forgive our intrusion, but we wanted to bring the medicine directly to you and perhaps offer additional assistance if you're willing." Robert's face flushed with a mixture of shame and pride. "We don't need charity," he began, but was interrupted by a soft moan from his wife as she shifted position, clearly in pain. Helen's approach was more direct. "Mr. Parker, I understand your pride. It's admirable. But right now your wife needs medication and your family deserves a proper night's sleep in a warm bed. We're not asking you to sacrifice your dignity. We're simply offering one family a helping hand." In the passenger seat, Sarah Parker had fully awakened now, her eyes widening as she recognized the famous faces outside their car. "Robert, what's happening?" she asked weakly. Jamie leaned through the window. "Mom, I got your medicine, and they want to help us." Rebecca stepped forward, holding out the pharmacy bag with the filled prescription and a bottle of water. Sarah looked from the bag to her child, understanding dawning on her tired face. "Oh, Jamie," she whispered, torn between gratitude and heartbreak that her child had felt compelled to ask strangers for help. Meryl spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "We've arranged a suite at the Marquis Hotel for tonight. It has 2 bedrooms, room service and proper beds. Helen's doctor friend has agreed to see Mrs. Parker tomorrow morning. No strings attached, no publicity. Just one night of comfort while we figure out next steps together." Robert's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he wrestled with the decision before him. For months he had carried the weight of his family's situation alone, determined to solve their problems without assistance. But looking at his wife's Simhane-etched face and his child's hopeful expression, something inside him finally yielded. "Sarah needs to take her medicine," he said quietly. A first tentative step toward acceptance. Within minutes, the small family had gathered their essential belongings, pitifully few bags containing everything they still owned. Robert locked the station wagon carefully, his movements deliberate, maintaining control over what little he could. The ride to the Marquis passed in awkward silence, with Jamie occasionally catching Meryl or Helen's encouraging smiles. The contrast between the luxury SUV and the family's circumstances couldn't have been starker, yet both actresses demonstrated a remarkable ability to make the Parkers feel neither pitied nor judged. Upon arrival, they were discreetly escorted through a service entrance to avoid the hotel's busy lobby. The suite, when they entered it, drew audible gasps from all 3 Parkers. 2 spacious bedrooms flanked a central living area with plush sofas and a dining table. A kitchenette gleamed, with stainless steel appliances, and the bathrooms featured deep tubs and fluffy towels. "This is—" Robert trailed off, overwhelmed. "Perfect for tonight," Helen finished for him. "The kitchen is fully stocked and room service is available 24 hours if you prefer." Sarah, who had taken her medication in the car, was already looking marginally better as she sank gratefully onto one of the sofas. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice stronger than it had been earlier. "No thanks necessary," Meryl assured her. "Jamie showed incredible courage tonight. You've raised a remarkable child." Jamie blushed, still uncertain whether to expect praise or punishment for the evening's actions. Robert noticed his child's discomfort and, in a surprising move, pulled Jamie into a tight hug. "You did what you thought was right," he said quietly. "That's all your mother and I have ever asked of you." The moment was tender and private, causing both actresses to step discreetly aside. Helen conferred briefly with Rebecca, who then approached the family with several business cards. "My direct line is on top," Rebecca explained. "Below that is Dr. Patel's information for tomorrow's 10 a.m. appointment. A car will be here at 9:30 to take you. The hotel is booked for 3 nights to start, so please don't worry about checkout. Tomorrow—" Robert began to protest, but Meryl gently interrupted. "Mr. Parker, consider this a beginning, not an end point. Tomorrow, when everyone has rested, we'd like to discuss some ideas for more permanent solutions." As the actresses prepared to leave, Sarah reached out to grasp both their hands. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Helen answered with characteristic honesty. "Because we can. Because your family matters. And because sometimes the universe puts the right people in the right place at exactly the right moment." After final goodbyes, the door closed behind Meryl and Helen. leaving the Parker family alone in luxurious surroundings that felt almost unreal after months in their car. "Dad?" Jamie asked hesitantly. "Are you mad at me?" Robert looked at his child, then at his wife, who was already looking more comfortable as her medication began to take effect. The anger and pride that had initially flared had given way to something else, a tentative hope he'd almost forgotten how to feel. "No. Jamie," he said softly, "I'm not mad. I think maybe you just saved us all." 1 week had passed since the fateful night outside the Barrymore Theatre. The Parker family sat together in their hotel suite, now extended indefinitely by Meryl's quiet arrangement with management. The transformation in their circumstances was evident in everything from their appearances to their demeanors. Sarah Parker sat upright on the sofa, her posture no longer curved by pain. Dr. Patel's examination had been thorough, resulting in a proper treatment plan and 3 months' worth of medication provided through the doctor's connection to a pharmaceutical assistance program. The dark circles under Sarah's eyes had faded, and some color had returned to her cheeks. Robert had showered, shaved, and trimmed his hair. Wearing new clothes selected during a discreet shopping trip arranged by Rebecca, he looked less like a man beaten down by circumstance and more like the confident foreman he'd once been. A stack of job applications and his newly updated resume sat on the table before him. Jamie, perhaps most transformed of all, had returned to school 3 days ago, armed with new supplies, appropriate clothing, and, most importantly, the security of knowing there would be a stable place to sleep that night. The teenager's shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of adult worries. A gentle knock at the door announced the arrival of their now familiar visitors. Helen entered first, followed by Meryl and Rebecca. No security detail accompanied them. Today, these visits had become comfortable enough to forego such formalities. "Good morning, Parkers," Helen greeted them warmly. "You're all looking well." Sarah rose to embrace both women, her initial awe of their celebrity status having given way to genuine appreciation of their character. "Dr. Patel says I'm responding better to the medication than she expected. I might be able to start looking for part-time work next week." "That's wonderful news," Meryl replied, settling into an armchair. "But don't rush it, your health comes first." Robert nodded toward the stack of applications. "I've got 3 interviews lined up, 2 construction companies and a building maintenance supervisor position at a school. The supervisor job pays less, but has better benefits and more stability." Helen's eyes sparkled with approval. "Sounds promising. And how was your first week back at school, Jamie?" Jamie grinned. "My math teacher was surprised I hadn't fallen behind. I told her I'd been studying at the library whenever I could." "Impressive dedication," Meryl commented, "which brings us to the purpose of our visit today." She exchanged glances with Helen before continuing. "We've been discussing some ideas for more permanent solutions for your family." The word permanent hung in the air, laden with hope, but also uncertainty. The Parkers had been careful not to ask what would happen when this temporary arrangement ended, not wanting to appear ungrateful or presumptuous. "We've learned that emergency relief, while crucial, is just the beginning," Helen explained. "Real change requires sustainable solutions." Rebecca opened her tablet and turned it toward the family. "We've found 3 apartment options within reasonable distance of Jamie's school. All are available for immediate occupancy with a 1-year lease." The Parkers leaned forward to look at the screen, which showed modest but clean apartments. Nothing luxurious, but worlds away from their station wagon. "They're all within your potential budget once Robert secures employment," Helen continued. "Meryl and I would like to cover the security deposit and first 3 months' rent, giving you time to rebuild your savings." Robert stiffened slightly. "That's incredibly generous, but—" "It's an investment, not charity," Meryl interrupted gently. "Consider it a bridge loan if that makes it easier to accept." Sarah reached for her husband's hand. "Robert, we need to think about Jamie's future, not just our pride." After a moment of internal struggle visible on his face, Robert nodded. "Thank you. It would give us the breathing room we need to get back on our feet." "Excellent," Helen said, briskly. "Now about employment, Rebecca has some additional connections." Rebecca swiped to a new screen on her tablet. "My brother-in-law manages a construction firm, specializing in commercial renovations. They're contracting for 3 major projects starting next month and need experienced foremen. I've scheduled an interview for you tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're interested." Robert's eyes widened. "Commercial renovations? That's actually my specialty. I supervised the Westfield Mall expansion at my last job." "I mentioned that," Rebecca confirmed with a smile. "He was quite interested in your experience." Jamie looked between the adults, absorbing the rapid transformation of their prospects. Just over a week ago, the family had been hiding from police patrols to get a night's sleep in their car. Now they were discussing apartments, job interviews, and futures that extended beyond surviving the next 24 hours. "There's something else," Meryl added, her expression softening as she turned to Jamie. "Your school principal mentioned you've always excelled in science and mathematics. The Academy of Science and Technology has a special admission opening for their spring semester. It's a college preparatory program with exceptional STEM education." Jamie's mouth fell open. "But that's the best science school in the city. The tuition must be covered," Helen finished simply, "through an anonymous scholarship fund that happens to be looking for precisely your type of potential." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Helen stated firmly. "Education is not where one compromises. Besides, the scholarship exists regardless. Jamie might as well benefit from it." Meryl leaned forward, her gaze serious. "What we're offering isn't about making your lives comfortable temporarily. It's about restoring the foundation you lost and creating opportunities for your family to thrive independently." Robert looked around the hotel suite that had become their temporary sanctuary. "When we were evicted, I promised myself I'd fix everything without help. I was wrong." His voice broke slightly. "Sometimes accepting help is the stronger choice when you have a family counting on you." "Precisely," Helen agreed. "And the best way to show gratitude isn't endless thanks. It's using this opportunity to rebuild your lives." Rebecca passed Robert a folder containing apartment details, job information, and school application materials for Jamie. "Take today to discuss everything as a family. We can reconvene tomorrow after your job interview to move forward with whatever decisions you make." As their visitors prepared to leave, Jamie suddenly asked, "Why isn't this being filmed or photographed or something? Don't celebrities usually want publicity when they help people?" Meryl and Helen exchanged amused glances before Meryl answered, "Real change happens in the quiet moments, Jamie, not in front of cameras. This isn't about our image, it's about your family's future." After their departure, the Parkers sat in contemplative silence, the folder on the coffee table representing possibilities that had seemed impossible just days ago. "Do you think we can really start over?" Jamie finally asked. "For real?" Sarah reached for her child's hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we already have, sweetheart, and this time we're not doing it alone." Robert nodded, his expression resolute as he opened the folder and began reviewing the apartment options. 1 week ago we were surviving. Now we're planning. That's the difference between emergency relief and actual change. Outside their window, New York City continued its relentless pace, unaware of the quiet transformation occurring in one hotel suite where a family dared to believe in second chances and the genuine kindness of 2 women who could have simply handed over $100 and walked away, but chose instead to remain and rebuild. 1 month after Jamie's desperate request outside the Barrymore Theatre, the Parker family stood in the center of their new apartment. Sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a quiet Queens neighborhood, illuminating freshly painted walls and modest but new furniture. The 2-bedroom apartment wasn't luxurious, but after months of living in their station wagon, it felt like a palace. "I still can't believe this is ours," Sarah said softly, running her hand along the kitchen counter. Her complexion had improved dramatically with proper medication and reduced stress. She moved with an ease that had been absent during their hardest months. The painful inflammation of her lupus, now controlled by the treatment plan Dr. Patel had prescribed. Robert stood nearby, dressed in work clothes bearing the logo of Metropolitan Commercial Renovations. The interview Rebecca had arranged had gone exceptionally well. Robert's experience had impressed the company's management enough that they'd offered him a position as senior foreman, with a salary comparable to his previous job and comprehensive health benefits that would cover Sarah's medical needs. First, day on the actual construction site today, he said, checking his watch. Orientation week is over. Time to prove they made the right choice. Jamie emerged from the bedroom that was now a dedicated space, rather than the back seat of a car. Dressed in the uniform of the Academy of Science and Technology, the teenager radiated a new confidence. The prestigious school had accepted Jamie immediately upon reviewing academic records and conducting an interview. What no one had told the Parkers was that Meryl had personally called the school's director, not to demand admission, but to ensure Jamie's application received fair consideration, despite their recent circumstances. "How do I look?" Jamie asked, adjusting the school tie nervously. "Like a future scientist," Sarah replied with a proud smile. "You'll do great today." Robert checked his watch again. "We should head out. I'll drop you at school on my way to the site." As they gathered their belongings, a knock at the door announced Helen's arrival. Unlike the constant presence of the first week, Meryl and Helen now visited separately and less frequently, a deliberate strategy to help the family regain independence while maintaining support. "Good morning, Parkers." Helen greeted them cheerfully, holding a small gift bag. "I thought I'd stop by to wish you both luck on your first big day." Jamie accepted the bag with curious hands, opening it to find a sleek scientific calculator. "This is the exact model the school recommended. Thank you," Helen winked. "A little bird told me you might need it for advanced mathematics." She turned to Robert. "And for the working man, a proper lunch." She handed him an insulated lunch bag. "Made it myself, so manage your expectations." Robert laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I appreciate it, Helen, really." The casual use of first names reflected the evolving relationship between the family and their benefactors. Initial awe had given way to genuine friendship, built on mutual respect, rather than celebrity worship or power imbalance. "Sarah, do you have a moment before they leave?" Helen asked. "I'd like to discuss something." While Robert and Jamie headed down to the car with promises to wait, Sarah invited Helen to sit at their small dining table. "You're looking well," Helen observed. "Dr. Patel mentioned your latest tests showed significant improvement." Sarah nodded. "I have more good days than bad now. It makes all the difference." She hesitated before adding, "I've been thinking about work. Not full-time yet, but maybe something to start building toward." Helen's eyes lit up. "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss. The hospital where Dr. Patel works has a patient advocacy program. They need people who understand firsthand what it's like to navigate medical challenges while dealing with financial hardship. It's part-time to start, 15 hours a week, with potential to grow." Sarah stared in surprise. "Patient advocacy? I've never done anything like that professionally." "But you've lived it," Helen pointed out. "Sometimes personal experience is the most valuable qualification. The position includes training." "I don't know what to say," Sarah responded, clearly overwhelmed by the possibility. "Say you'll consider it," Helen replied simply. "That's all. The hospital administrator expects your call if you're interested." She placed a business card on the table. "No pressure from me or Meryl. This is entirely your decision." After Helen departed, Sarah joined her family in the car, tucking the business card carefully into her wallet. The short drive to Jamie's new school was filled with excited chatter about classes and teachers. When they arrived, several students greeted Jamie by name. Connections already formed during the orientation days. "Look at that," Robert said softly, as they watched Jamie walk confidently toward the entrance. "1 month ago, we were worried about survival. Now our kid is attending one of the best schools in the city." The second stop was Robert's construction site, an office building renovation in Midtown. As Sarah slid into the driver's seat after Robert exited, he leaned down to the window. "Sarah, we're going to be okay," he said with conviction that had been absent for months. "Really okay." "I know," she replied, and for the first time in a long time she truly believed it. Driving back to their apartment, Sarah reflected on the whirlwind of the past month. The 3 days in the hotel had extended to 2 weeks while they secured the apartment. Meryl had connected them with a furniture store that was replacing their showroom displays, allowing the family to purchase nearly new furniture at drastically reduced prices. Helen had arranged for their remaining belongings to be retrieved from storage where they'd been kept since the eviction. Each piece of assistance had been provided with careful consideration for the family's dignity. Rather than simply paying for everything, Meryl and Helen had created opportunities that allowed the Parkers to participate in their own recovery, negotiating the apartment lease themselves, selecting their own furniture, interviewing for jobs rather than being handed positions. Back at the apartment, Sarah made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the business card Helen had given. Her patient advocacy. Using her difficult experience to help others navigate similar challenges, the idea resonated deeply. With sudden determination, she reached for her phone and dialed the number. As she waited for someone to answer, her gaze drifted to a small, framed photo they'd recently placed on the wall, a candid shot of the Parker family with Meryl and Helen during a quiet dinner celebration of Robert's new job. Everyone was laughing, the moment capturing not celebrity and fans but friends sharing a genuine connection. The hospital administrator answered, and Sarah took a deep breath. "Hello, this is Sarah Parker. Helen Mirren suggested I call about the patient advocacy position. I'd like to learn more about it." As Sarah discussed the opportunity, she realized that rebuilding wasn't just about regaining what they'd lost. It was about creating something new and perhaps even better. Their foundation had crumbled, but the new one being constructed was stronger for having weathered the storm. Outside the window, New York City continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the quiet transformation of one family who had nearly slipped through society's cracks, but had instead found their way back through an unexpected encounter, and the genuine kindness it had sparked. 3 months had passed since the night outside the Barrymore Theatre. Spring had arrived in New York City, bringing with it new beginnings that mirrored the Parker family's continuing transformation. Their apartment now truly felt like home, with personal touches that spoke of stability and permanence. Family, photos on the walls, Jamie's science awards on a dedicated shelf, and Sarah's collection of potted herbs thriving on the kitchen windowsill. On this particular Saturday morning, Meryl arrived carrying a tote bag filled with art supplies. Her visits had become less about assistance and more about friendship, a natural evolution that reflected the changing dynamic between the actress and the family she had helped. "Where is our young scientist today?" Meryl asked, setting the bag. "On the dining table." Sarah smiled as she poured coffee for her guest. "In the bedroom, working on a project for the science exhibition next month. Robert is at the construction site, weekend overtime. The Westridge project is behind schedule." "And how is the patient advocacy position treating you?" Meryl inquired, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "Better than I expected," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with purpose. "I've helped 3 families navigate insurance appeals this month alone. It feels redemptive somehow. Using what we went through to make others' journeys easier." Meryl nodded appreciatively. "That's the true measure of healing, when your scars become someone else's map." Their conversation was interrupted by Jamie bursting from the bedroom, holding what appeared to be detailed sketches of some kind of device. "Mom, I figured out how to make the solar filtration system more efficient by—" Jamie stopped abruptly upon noticing Meryl. "Oh, hi, Miss Streep. I didn't know you were visiting today." Meryl laughed warmly. "Clearly I'm interrupting a moment of scientific breakthrough. Don't let me stop you." Jamie approached the table, spreading out the sketches with infectious enthusiasm. "It's for the exhibition. We're supposed to design something that addresses a real-world problem. I'm creating a portable water filtration system powered by solar energy." Meryl leaned forward to examine the drawings, genuinely impressed by their complexity and detail. "These are remarkable, Jamie. The precision in these sketches—" "Jamie has always been able to draw," Sarah explained with maternal pride. "Even as a little child, the drawings were always so detailed. Blueprints of Lego. Creations, maps of imaginary places. These aren't just functional diagrams," Meryl observed thoughtfully. "There's artistic talent here too. The perspective, the shading." She looked up at Jamie with newfound understanding. "You're not just visualizing the science, you're creating art that explains it." Jamie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I just draw what I see in my head. It helps me think through the problems. Meryl reached for her tote bag. That's precisely why I brought these today. Helen mentioned you were looking for ways to illustrate your project. She emptied the bag to reveal professional-grade sketching pencils, technical pens, and a high-quality drawing tablet. Jamie's eyes widened. These are professional supplies. They are, Meryl confirmed. My friend is a production designer for films. When I described your project, she suggested these would be more suitable than regular school supplies. Sarah watched as her child handled the materials with reverent care. She had always recognized Jamie's artistic ability, but had never had the resources to nurture it, alongside the scientific interests that had seemed more practical for future career prospects. Try the tablet, Meryl encouraged. It's preloaded. With design software that architects and engineers use, Jamie needed no further prompting, immediately sitting down and beginning to explore the new tool. Within minutes, the teenager was completely absorbed, redrawing one of the sketches with a level of detail that surprised even Sarah. Meryl moved to the kitchen with Sarah, giving Jamie space to explore. I've seen that look before, she said, quietly. That's not just interest, that's passion. Sarah nodded, watching her child with newfound perspective. Jamie's science teacher mentioned last week that the designs were exceptional, but I thought she was just being kind. No, Meryl said definitively. What I'm seeing is a rare combination of scientific understanding and artistic vision. That's something special, Sarah. Something worth nurturing. As they spoke, Jamie looked up suddenly. This is amazing. I can create 3D models and rotate them to see all angles. I can test how water would actually flow through the system. Meryl smiled knowingly. I thought you might appreciate that feature. Later, after Jamie had returned to the bedroom to continue working with the new supplies, Sarah and Meryl sat on the small balcony, enjoying the spring sunshine. I never saw this coming, Sarah admitted. We were so focused on survival, then on stability. Noticing talents, nurturing potential, those felt like luxuries we couldn't afford. Meryl's expression was contemplative. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see what's right in front of us. That's not a failure on your part, it's just human nature. The Science Academy has been wonderful for Jamie's academic development, Sarah continued. But there's nothing in their curriculum that specifically addresses this artistic technical ability. Perhaps there should be, Meryl mused. There's a specialized summer program at Rhode Island School of Design for precisely this intersection of art and science. They call it visual science communication. Students learn to illustrate complex scientific concepts for academic publications, museums, and educational materials. Sarah's expression fell slightly. That sounds perfect, but before you worry about costs, Meryl interrupted gently. It's not what you're thinking. The program offers full scholarships to students who demonstrate exceptional ability. Jamie's science exhibition project would make an excellent portfolio submission. When Robert returned home that evening, he found his family gathered around the dining table, all focused on Jamie's newly refined designs displayed on the tablet. The technical drawings had evolved dramatically, now including color coding for different components and cutaway views that revealed the internal mechanisms. What happened here? Robert asked, amazed by the transformation of the project. Meryl brought me professional supplies, Jamie explained excitedly. And I might apply for this summer program that combines science and art. It's super competitive, but Miss Streep thinks I have a chance. Robert studied the designs with growing appreciation for his child's previously unrecognized talent. These are incredible, Jamie. They look professional. That's what I've been saying, Sarah agreed. We've been so focused on Jamie's scientific abilities that we missed this whole other dimension. Later that night, after Jamie had finally been convinced to put away the tablet and get some sleep, Robert and Sarah sat together on their small sofa, discussing the day's revelation. It's strange, Robert reflected. 6 months ago, we were just trying to keep a roof over our heads, even if that roof was our car. Now we're talking about specialized summer programs and artistic talents. Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Jamie hadn't approached Meryl that night. Robert was quiet for a moment before responding. I think about that too. But what strikes me most isn't the material help they've given us. It's how they've helped us see possibilities we couldn't see before. Outside their window, the New York skyline twinkled with countless lights, each representing lives being lived, in parallel to their own. Somewhere in that vast city, Meryl Streep was making a phone call to the program director at RISD, not to pull celebrity strings, but simply to ensure that an application from a talented teenager named Jamie Parker would receive the fair consideration it deserved. 6 months had passed since the fateful encounter outside the Barrymore Theatre. The Parker family's station wagon, once their reluctant home, was now parked in a designated spot outside their apartment building, serving its intended purpose as transportation rather than shelter. The spring had given way to summer, bringing with it not just warmer temperatures but a sense of warmth and possibility that had once seemed unattainable. Jamie stood at the front of a classroom at Westside Middle School, addressing 30 students from the after-school science program. The portable solar water filtration system that had begun as sketches on paper now stood as a fully realized prototype on the demonstration table, its components gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The crisis of clean water access isn't just a developing world problem, Jamie explained with newfound confidence. It affects communities right here in the United States. After natural disasters, during infrastructure failures, or in underserved, rural areas, access to clean water can disappear overnight. In the back of the classroom, Sarah and Robert watched with undisguised pride as their child articulated complex concepts with clarity and passion. Beside them sat Helen Mirren, who had quietly arrived midway through the presentation, slipping into the classroom without fanfare. "When my family was living in our car," Jamie continued, voice steady despite the personal revelation, "we experienced firsthand how difficult access to basic necessities can be. That experience inspired this design." A ripple of whispers moved through the young audience, not mockery but genuine surprise and respect. Jamie's academic reputation at the Academy of Science and Technology had grown significantly over the past months, making this guest presentation at a partner school a natural extension of that success. As the demonstration concluded, and students gathered around for a closer look at the filtration system, Helen leaned toward Sarah. "Remarkable poise," she observed quietly. "Jamie speaks about your difficult time without shame or self-pity. That's unusual for someone so young." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving her child. "We decided early on that we wouldn't treat our experience as a family secret. It happened, we survived it, and now we use it to help others understand homelessness differently." After the students dispersed, Jamie approached with the school's science coordinator, Ms. Chen, who extended her hand to Helen with professional composure, despite her obvious recognition of the famous actress. "Ms. Mirren, what a pleasure. Jamie didn't mention you would be attending." "I wanted to support without creating a distraction," Helen explained with a warm smile. "Jamie's work deserves to be the center of attention, not my presence." Ms. Chen turned to the Parker family. "Jamie's presentation was exceptional. Our students rarely get exposure to projects of this caliber, especially with such a compelling personal connection. We'd like to expand this into a full program next semester. Perhaps Jamie could mentor some of our students who are interested in sustainable engineering." The question was directed as much to Sarah and Robert as to Jamie, acknowledging the family unit that had grown stronger through adversity. "I'd like that," Jamie replied, looking to parents for approval. "Maybe we could develop simplified versions of the system for the students to build themselves." Robert nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like an excellent idea." As they left the school, Helen's driver waited discreetly in an unassuming sedan, a deliberate choice that reflected the actress's understanding of the delicate balance between providing assistance and maintaining the family's dignity. The Parkers no longer needed rides, but the gesture of attending Jamie's presentation deserved celebration. "I thought we might have an early dinner," Helen suggested. "Meryl sends her regrets. She's filming today but wanted me to capture video of the presentation." Over dinner at a modest family restaurant, Helen had long since learned that the Parkers preferred comfortable, unpretentious settings to upscale establishments. Jamie excitedly discussed the RISD summer program acceptance that had arrived the previous week. The director said my application was one of the strongest they'd received, Jamie explained, barely pausing between bites of pasta. And I got the full scholarship. Well deserved, Helen affirmed, though I'm not surprised. Your portfolio was exceptional. Robert, now settled into his role as senior foreman with a recent promotion that included management responsibilities, regarded Helen with thoughtful eyes. We've been talking as a family about how to give back, he said. Financial stability is still new for us, but we want to help others the way we were helped. Helen raised an eyebrow with interest. What are you considering? Sarah set down her fork, her expression animated with purpose. My work with patient advocacy has shown me how many families are one medical crisis away from where we were. We're establishing a small emergency fund through the Hospital Foundation, specifically for families facing both medical and housing insecurity. We're starting small, Robert added, but the construction company has agreed to match our contributions for the first year. Jamie jumped in eagerly. And I'm working with Ms. Chen to develop a STEM mentorship program pairing academy students with kids from underserved schools. The filtration system will be our first project. Helen's expression reflected genuine admiration. You've embraced the concept of paying it forward beautifully. We learned from the best, Sarah replied simply. You and Meryl could have simply handed Jamie that $100 and walked away feeling you'd done a good deed. Instead, you stayed and helped us rebuild our lives from the ground up. After dinner, as they stepped outside into the warm summer evening, a young woman approached their group hesitantly, her clothes clean but well-worn, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but—" She faltered, looking directly at the Parkers rather than at Helen. "I recognized you from the patient advocacy office at Metropolitan Hospital. You helped my neighbor with her insurance appeal last month." Sarah stepped forward with immediate warmth. "Of course, Mrs. Gonzalez, right? How is she doing?" The young woman twisted her hands nervously. "She's better, thanks to you. But I'm in a situation now. My roommate moved out suddenly and I can't make rent by myself. I'm facing eviction and I don't know where to turn." Instead of looking uncomfortable or referring the woman to social services, Sarah immediately reached into her purse for a business card. "Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. We have an emergency housing assistance program that might help, and I can connect you with legal aid for tenant issues." The woman accepted the card with visible relief. "Thank you. I was so scared to ask for help, but Mrs. Gonzalez said you really understand what people are going through." "I do," Sarah confirmed simply. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is reach out." After the young woman departed, Helen regarded the Parker family with quiet appreciation. "That," she said softly, "is why Meryl and I chose to help your family. We sensed that the impact wouldn't stop with you." As they walked to their respective vehicles, Jamie suddenly asked, "Do you think Meryl would mind if I mentioned our story in my RISD program? Not using her name specifically, but talking about how artistic talent can be discovered in unexpected circumstances." Helen smiled warmly. "I think she would be honored, Jamie. The best stories are those that inspire others to see possibilities they might otherwise miss." Robert unlocked their car, no longer a shelter of last resort but a symbol of restored normalcy. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine being in a position to help anyone else. Now it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Sarah nodded in agreement, her gaze meeting Helen's with mutual understanding. "The real power of kindness isn't just in the receiving," she observed thoughtfully. "It's in how it changes who you become afterward, how it opens your eyes to ways you can extend that same kindness to others." As they drove home through the city streets, Jamie gazed out the window, seeing not just buildings and streets but a landscape of possibilities, for themselves and for others whose stories were still unfolding, waiting perhaps for their own. Unexpected encounters that might change everything. The anniversary came quietly without fanfare. Exactly 1 year had passed since Jamie had approached Meryl Streep outside the Barrymore Theatre, a desperate child asking for $100 to buy medication for a sick mother. On this particular evening, the Parker family gathered in their apartment, with the two women who had transformed their lives, celebrating not with grand gestures, but with the simple joy of shared accomplishment. Their dining table, once a luxury they couldn't have imagined owning, now held a homemade dinner prepared by Sarah, whose health had stabilized enough that cooking had become a pleasure rather than an exhausting chore. The apartment itself had evolved from a basic living space into a true home, filled with personal touches that spoke of security and permanence. Jamie's framed certificate of achievement from the RISD summer program, Robert's promotion announcement. In a small frame, Sarah's growing collection of thank you cards from families she had helped through patient advocacy. "I can't believe it's been a full year," Robert said, raising his glass in a toast. "From living in our car to hosting dinner, for 2 Oscar winners." Meryl laughed warmly. "I think we've moved well beyond credentials at this point, wouldn't you say?" It was true. The relationship that had begun with awestruck gratitude had evolved into genuine friendship. Meryl and Helen no longer visited out, of obligation or concern, but because they genuinely enjoyed the Parkers' company. The conversation flowed naturally between topics: Jamie's school projects, Robert's work challenges, Sarah's advocacy successes, and the actress's current productions. "Jamie, tell them your news," Sarah encouraged, serving a second helping of vegetable lasagna to Helen, who had once confessed it was better than her personal chef's version. Jamie's face lit up. "The technical drawings I did for my filtration system? They're being published in the Journal of High School Scientific Research next month. And the Academy is submitting my project for the National Young Inventors Prize." "That doesn't surprise me in the least," Helen declared. "Your presentation at the RISD program final showcase was exceptional. The program director told me they've rarely seen such sophisticated work from a high school student." "Speaking of publications," Meryl added, "Sarah, I was impressed by your op-ed in the Metropolitan Health Review about patient advocacy reform." "You've become quite the writer," Sarah blushed slightly. "It's easier to write about something when you've lived it. The hospital administration has been surprisingly receptive to some of my suggestions for improving support systems for families facing medical financial crises." Robert reached for his wife's hand, squeezing it gently with pride. "Sarah's not just advocating for individual patients anymore. She's helping shape policy. The hospital director has her working on a comprehensive program that might be implemented citywide." The warmth in the room had nothing to do with the summer heat outside, and everything to do with the bonds forged through shared experience. As they moved from dinner to dessert, a beautiful cake Jamie had baked with newly discovered culinary skills, the conversation turned reflective. "I've been thinking about that night," Jamie said suddenly, "about how close I came to not approaching you, Meryl. I almost lost my nerve." Meryl's expression grew thoughtful. "And I almost attended a different event that evening. Helen and I had been invited to a gallery opening as well." "The universe conspires in strange ways," Helen mused. "Small decisions that lead to life-changing intersections." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "We've never actually asked, what made you stop and really listen to Jamie that night? Celebrities must get approached constantly with requests for money or help." Meryl and Helen exchanged a meaningful glance before Meryl answered. "There was something in Jamie's eyes. Not just desperation, but dignity. A determination to solve a problem rather than escape it." She smiled at Jamie. "You didn't ask for yourself. You asked for your mother. That spoke volumes." And then, Helen added, "When we learned you were living in your car, trying to keep your family together, maintaining schoolwork despite everything, some situations simply demand response." Robert, who had always been the most reticent about accepting help, spoke up. "I've learned something important this year. I always thought asking for help was a weakness, that a man should be able to provide for his family without assistance. I was wrong." He looked around the table, his expression open and sincere. "True strength sometimes lies in recognizing when you can't do it alone." "The most remarkable transformation," Meryl observed, "hasn't been in your circumstances, though those have certainly changed dramatically. It's been in how you've used your experience to help others." She was right. The Parkers' modest emergency fund at the hospital had already helped 3 families avoid eviction during medical crises. Jamie's mentorship program at Westside Middle School had expanded to include students from 2 additional schools. Robert had convinced his construction company to implement a second-chance hiring initiative for workers who had experienced homelessness. Each family member had found a way to extend the kindness they had received. As the evening began to wind down, Sarah disappeared briefly into the bedroom, returning with a carefully wrapped package. "We wanted to give you both something to mark this anniversary," she explained, placing it on the table between Meryl and Helen. Inside was a beautifully crafted scrapbook. The first page held a news clipping, a barely noticeable item from page 6 that mentioned Meryl and Helen missing the Barrymore premiere to attend to a personal matter. The subsequent pages chronicled the year through photos, Jamie's drawings, milestone markers, and heartfelt handwritten notes. "We wanted you to see the full impact of that night," Jamie explained, as the actresses turned the pages with visible emotion. "Not just on us, but on everyone we've been able to help because of how you helped us." The final page held a striking, technical drawing in Jamie's distinctive style, a rendering of 2 hands reaching toward a third, smaller hand, creating a bridge across troubled water. Below it, Sarah had written, "Some call it charity, some call it kindness. We call it transformation." Helen blinked rapidly, her usual composure momentarily shaken. "This is extraordinarily thoughtful." "It's perfect," Meryl added softly. "Thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey." As the evening came to a close, with promises of future dinners and continued friendship, the conversation turned naturally to the future. Jamie's college aspirations, now a realistic goal rather than an impossible dream. Sarah's expanding role in patient advocacy. Robert's growing responsibilities at the construction company. Standing at the door to bid their guests goodbye, the Parker family presented a strikingly different picture than they had 1 year ago, not just in their improved circumstances, but in the confidence and purpose that now defined them. The desperate night that had brought them together had faded into memory, replaced by the shared experience of genuine transformation. "Same time next year?" Helen suggested with a warm smile. "Absolutely," Robert confirmed. "Our home is always open to you both." As the door closed behind their departing guests, the word lingered in the air. Home. Not just a place to sleep, but a foundation from which to grow, to give back, and to build a future none of them could have imagined in the darkest days of their past. 5 years had passed since that cold New York evening when a desperate request for $100 had set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just one family's future, but created ripples that continued to touch lives across the city. The modest apartment that had once seemed like an unattainable luxury to the Parker family had given way to a small but comfortable house in Queens, with a yard where Sarah's garden flourished and a dedicated studio space where Jamie worked on increasingly sophisticated technical illustrations. The house buzzed with activity this particular afternoon as Jamie, now a poised young adult, moved methodically through last-minute preparations. Boxes of personal belongings sat neatly labeled in the living room, ready for the next day's departure to Cornell University, where a full scholarship awaited in their prestigious engineering physics program with a minor in scientific visualization. "Jamie?" Sarah called from the kitchen. "Helen and Meryl just texted. Their car is 5 minutes away." "Almost ready," Jamie replied, making a final adjustment to the presentation materials arranged on the dining table. Robert emerged from the garage, where he'd been loading the car in preparation for tomorrow's college move-in. As construction operations manager for Metropolitan Commercial Renovations, he now supervised multiple projects across the city, his expertise and leadership valued throughout the company. The promotion had come 6 months earlier, along with a salary that had finally allowed the family to purchase their modest home. "Everything's packed except your art supplies and your laptop," Robert confirmed. "Those will keep with us in the due front seat tomorrow." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway announced their guests' arrival. Unlike their first meeting, when security teams and careful distance had been the norm, Meryl and Helen now arrived without fanfare, 2 friends visiting to celebrate a significant milestone. Sarah went to greet them, her confident stride and healthy appearance a testament to how far she had come. As Director of Patient Family Services at Metropolitan Hospital, she had transformed what had begun as a part-time advocacy position into a comprehensive department that supported families, navigating medical and financial challenges. Her lupus was well managed, with only occasional minor flares that no longer dictated the parameters of her life. "Perfect timing," Sarah said, embracing each woman warmly. "Jamie's presentation is all set up." The living room had been arranged for the occasion, with chairs positioned facing the dining table where Jamie's materials were displayed. This gathering represented more than a simple college send-off. It was the unveiling of something the young artist-engineer had been developing for months. Once everyone was settled, Jamie stood before them with poised confidence that would have been unimaginable to the desperate child of 5 years ago. "Before I leave for Cornell tomorrow, I wanted to share something important with all of you," Jamie began. "As you know, my work combining scientific visualization with engineering has led to several publications and exhibitions. But this project is different. It's personal." Jamie unveiled a series of striking technical illustrations mounted on presentation boards. They depicted an innovative modular housing system designed specifically for families experiencing temporary homelessness. "This is the Parker Transition Housing Initiative," Jamie explained. "It's a dignified alternative to traditional shelters, designed with input from families who have actually experienced homelessness." The illustrations showed cleverly designed units that could be rapidly deployed in unused urban spaces, providing private family accommodations with built-in access to social services, job placement resources, and educational support. "The solar technology evolved from my early filtration system," Jamie continued, pointing to specific technical features. "And the modular construction methods are based on systems I observed during visits to Dad's construction sites." Robert leaned forward, visibly moved by the integration of his work into his child's vision. "But the most important elements," Jamie emphasized, came from Mum's patient advocacy work. The understanding that solutions must address the whole family system, not just provide temporary shelter. Meryl studied the designs with genuine interest. "These are remarkable, Jamie. Have you presented them to anyone yet?" Jamie nodded. "Actually, yes. The Donovan Foundation reviewed the proposal last month. They've agreed to fund a pilot program here in New York." The announcement was met with surprised excitement from everyone except Sarah and Robert, who had been sworn to secrecy until this moment. 3 units will be constructed beginning next month," Jamie continued. "And if the pilot succeeds, the foundation will fund a full 20-unit community." Helen smiled knowingly. "I sense there's more to this announcement." Jamie grinned. "The foundation has also established a scholarship fund for children from the housing units who show academic promise. It's being named the Streep Educational Initiative." Both actresses appeared genuinely surprised by this news. "We didn't authorize that," Meryl said, though her expression showed she was touched by the gesture. "The foundation board insisted," Jamie explained. "They were quite moved when I shared how a chance encounter with 2 actresses, who could have simply handed over $100 instead, created lasting change for an entire family." Robert stood, his expression solemn yet filled with pride. "What Jamie hasn't mentioned is that the Donovan Foundation became interested specifically because Jamie approached them the same way Jamie approached you that night, Meryl. Directly, honestly, with dignity, rather than desperation. The difference," Sarah added softly, "is that this time our child was asking for others, not for us." The room fell quiet as the significance of the moment settled over them all. 5 years earlier, a family in crisis had intersected with 2 women of means and influence. What could have been a momentary exchange, money given, gratitude expressed, lives continuing on separate trajectories, had instead become a transformative relationship that had not only rebuilt one family but was now extending to help countless others. "I'll be working on the project remotely from Cornell," Jamie explained. "It's going to be my ongoing independent study project. The engineering department has already approved it." As the conversation continued into evening, with dinner and celebration of Jamie's imminent departure for college, the topic naturally expanded to include the other ways. The original act of kindness had multiplied. Sarah's hospital program had become a model being implemented in 3 other New York hospitals. Robert's company had hired and trained 15 formerly homeless individuals, 12 of whom had advanced to skilled positions. Later, as the evening wound down, Jamie presented Meryl and Helen with bound portfolios containing complete technical specifications for the housing initiative. "I wanted you both to have the first official copies," Jamie explained, "because none of this would exist without you." Helen shook her head slightly. "No, Jamie, we may have provided opportunity, but you and your parents created everything that followed." "Never doubt that." As their guests prepared to leave, Meryl paused at the door, looking back at the home and family that had flourished in the years since their first meeting. "When people ask what creates lasting change," she observed quietly, "they often look for grand gestures or sweeping policies, but sometimes it's as simple as seeing another person's dignity, even when they're at their most vulnerable." Jamie nodded in understanding. "And sometimes it's about asking for help when you need it, then learning how to offer help when you can." Outside, the Queen's neighborhood settled into evening quiet. In this modest house, a family once defined by crisis was now defined by purpose. And across the city, lives as yet unknown to them would soon be touched by the expanding legacy of a single act of kindness that had refused to remain small. Through Jamie's housing initiative, Sarah's hospital program, and Robert's workplace, advocacy, the original $100 request, had transformed into something immeasurable, a continuing cycle of recognition, opportunity, and dignified assistance that would extend far beyond any of them. As Meryl had observed years earlier, real change happens in the quiet moments, not in front of cameras. And in those quiet moments, passed from person to person, family to family, community to community, kindness finds its truest and most enduring legacy.